What is the most disturbing thing a teacher has done in class? Walked into my junior year trig class early one time. The class was right after lunch. Found my teacher with her head mostly down, an open bottle of whiskey, and a small, empty drinking glass on her desk. She looked up. I smiled. She casually opened her desk and deposited the glass and bottle within, without breaking eye contact. What did you see here today, Arden Garden? Lesson preparation. Good. And that's how I passed junior trig. When I was first grade, there was an actual fire and my teacher fled the classroom and left us alone. We were standing around in the classroom until two very shocked firefighters entered the room who radioed for backed up and helped us out of the first floor window. I remember seeing the fire chief screaming an expletive tirade at our teacher like sergeant does to recruit. I also had a teacher who believed in homeopathic medicine. She got a decent-sized cut one day falling and hitting her arm along a drawer, think seeing significant meat, and came back 2 days later. She had this weird bandage and there was leaves and shit sticking out. About 2 more days and her arm was incredibly weak, so she got a sling. The next week she came in and stunk. It was just this putrid rolling think smell. The following say smell was still there, her eyes were sunken, and she was breathing weird. By the end of the day she passed out and was, against her will, taken to the hospital. Her nephew was in my gym and told us the rest. It turns out she elected not to get stitches and decided she'd drive home, pack a half-inch cut with honey and various herbs. She then wrapped the arm up. Humans are not meant to have a wound full of crap, so her body said fuck that. The whole cut was rotten. She was deemed, due to a high temperature, not to be able to make decisions on her own and basically asked her mother if they can do real medicine. The mother said yes and they cut a sizable chunk of flesh out, pumped her full of medicine, and about a week later she was out. Want to know the real kicker? She stopped speaking to her mother for almost 2 years because she allowed doctors to pump poison into her. Soon after she got fired for cursing out the principal over him calling an ambulance and threatened to sue him. When I was teaching, another guy, who was a disbarred lawyer, called a girl up to the front of the classroom and had her twirl around and then said something to the effect of, "All the boys are really happy you dressed like that today," almost surprisingly. That got him canned. Also, the priest at my church tells the story of a professor of his at Sewanee who was a total alcoholic. One day he's late for class. The classroom is in the basement of the building, with windows high on the wall that are at ground level on the outside, and are at the bottom of a small slope from the sidewalk. Someone notices that here comes the professor on the sidewalk, except that instead of continuing down the sidewalk and entering the building, he veers off the sidewalk and starts walking down the slope. He proceeds to fall down, roll down the slope until he bumps into the windows, opens the window, climbs in, and proceeds to start lecturing. When I was 11, we got a new maths teacher in my secondary school. A newly qualified teacher, he was everything the other teachers were not. He was young, he was handsome, he was fun, and he didn't mind us mucking about a bit during lesson, as long as we got the work done. Needless to say, we all loved him. The boys thought he was cool, the girls thought him dreamy. Or at least, most of them did. Fast forward to November, the veneer of novelty had faded, and a creeping sense of unseas was starting to steal over the class when it came time for our maths lesson. The teacher that began as fun, jovial, and attractive was still very much all of those things, but it slowly dawned on us that, beneath the megawatt smile was a lurking cunning, a sinister edge. At 11, none of us could quite pinpoint just what it was that unnerved us so, but it was a growing presence. As palpable as it was, we had the petty squabbles of secondary school politics to be getting on with, and it fell from our minds as soon as we spilled out of the maths block each week. By that spring we could no longer ignore it. It had become all too clear to some of us just what the source of the unseas was. The handsome, clean-cut teacher had ever been in the habit of moving amongst the class, to check scores and keep an eye on covert message throwing, but as the weather brightened, the atmosphere in the class dimmed. In checking our work, the teacher often leaned over our shoulders. The eagle-eyed of us began to notice he was leaning only over the shoulders of the girls, and it only escalated from there. It bears mentioning that, by the age of 11, puberty had hit me like a freight train to the ovaries, and I was already very womanly in my shape. I'd ricocheted from a training bra to an EE cup in a matter of months, and was still growing. This hadn't gone unnoticed, especially by the teacher. He was a constant presence. He'd loom behind you, his body pressed against the back of your chair, and his acrid, tobacco-scented breath in your ear as he stared down your uniform shirt. He'd grind against your back, and spread his hands across your shoulders and push to hold you in your seat as he shoved his boner against your lower back. His air of authority as a teacher held many petrified in his grasp, unable to speak out lest they be the ones reprimanded for questioning a staff member. Word spread quickly just what the teacher was up to, and the sense of wrong that pervaded the year group transcended social boundaries. The princes of the school's social order would warn pariahs on the way in, and he became the boogeyman of the school. Boys began seating themselves between the girls as an honor guard, volunteering to write on the board so the girls didn't have to move. Scarves, sweaters, and blazers were passed between us like contraband items to save the girls from his leching. Things came to a head when a particularly rowdy group of boys formed a living, swearing wall between him and the girls, huddled as we were at the back. Then, as quickly as he swept into our lives that September, he vanished. In retrospect, he was most likely arrested. TL. Doctor. My old maths teacher was a pedophile, and used to grind his hips into your back as you sat in your seat. The school's kids put aside the social order and formed a coup against him. I had a gym teacher in HS who have the class do leg lifts during calisthenics, and he'd walk up and down the row looking up girls' shorts. But if you thought that was pervy. I had a friend who was a girl, but not a girlfriend, who said her gym teacher would make you open your towel up and show her that you showered after class. If she didn't think you showered well enough, she'd take your towel and send you back to the showers with a pat on the butt where she'd watch. My art teacher used to take students' cell phones and put them in her cleavage till the end of class. My high school math teacher broke down sobbing one day in class because her sister had been on a small boat in the Caribbean which was taken over by pirates, and she and her husband were most likely murdered. My teacher was going to have to try to gain custody of the kids. My high school Spanish teacher had 2 students hold up a curtain in front of the class so she could change her clothes. My gym class was training in the health room, mini in school gym, and we were doing leg training, so my teacher sits down, does one leg extension and shits himself. He said it was common when doing lower body workouts. Female social studies teacher, 9th grade. I'd rather rape a priest than have sex with a high school dropout. My 11th grade physics teacher was quite a character. Someone once threw a rock at the lab window during class, and he proceeded to stop talking mid-sentence, sprint across the room, launch himself over the tables lining the back wall, vault out the window down a 6-foot drop and chase the kid down. We thought he was handing out a referral. He told the guy to stop throwing things and have a nice day. Had a gymnastic teacher who told the girls that doing sport without a bra is healthy and decreases the chance of breast cancer. Of course, we were doing trampoline at that time of the year. To this day he is not allowed to teach girls in sport. Well, this isn't what a teacher did, it is still an interesting story. Some kids decided it would be funny to dose the home EC teacher's coffee with some LSD. She made it into the next period before she was found crawling down the hall to the administration office. She was absent for a week after the incident. The kid who did it was busted and expelled from the school. Edit. Words. He, in the same day, mind you, locked a kid in a supply closet and drew detailed pictures of grasshopper intercourse on the board, later using dead grasshoppers in formaldehyde to demonstrate. I wasn't in the class, but we had a very strange physics teacher at my high school. Apparently, one day he was getting too loud while teaching, and the science teacher from next door came in to ask him to quiet down since her kids had a test. In response, he pushed her into the lab room storage room and locked the door. He locked another teacher in a closet and then just went back to his screamy teaching method. A student from the other class came looking for their teacher and let her out. It was a whole thing, and that physics teacher was fired by the end of the week. Punched a kid in the middle of class. It turned out he had a brain tumor, so he wasn't fired. I had a professor once pass around a jar of pure nicotine to a lecture hall of 500 students and dared anyone to drink it. Guaranteed death. My sex ed teacher told us she would cut slits in her husband's penis while he was sleeping if she ever caught him cheating. The intent was to watch his penis rip apart from morning wood. When I was in kindergarten, we had a system where if you had 5 connector cubes, I honestly don't remember what they were building blocks that went together, you got 30 minutes of free times after nap time. If you were bad, you lost a cube, and you lost a few minutes of free time. If you were good, you could get extra cubes, and cut nap time short to play quietly while the others finished. If you didn't feel like napping, but weren't allowed to play, you had to sit at the front with the teacher and watch everyone else play. It actually wasn't that bad, and only a few kids missed out on 5 minutes max of playtime due to bad behavior. So we had a substitute one day, who was on a power trip with a bunch of 5-year-olds. Asked to go potty and didn't say, "May I?" Lose a cube. Elbows on the table? Lose a cube. Spell a word wrong? Lose a cube. On and on and on. And she was nasty with it. Got into our faces, yelling, spittle everywhere, marching us to our table of cubes and making a show of us losing one. Crying meant you lost another. I remember that day was the first time I'd ever lost a cube, and I'd lost all 5. I wasn't the only one. In fact, only one girl managed to keep some, by simply being quiet and not going potty. So instead of a 30-minute nap and 30 minutes of play, there was an hour of sniffled, silent crying, and Karen spent half of it in the corner, silently playing by herself while the teacher watched. Apparently another teacher walked by during this prolonged nap time and told the principal. Lady principal came in, asked to talk to the sub, and our vice principal took over for the rest of the day. We didn't have that sub again. Had a male teacher show up visible wasted. During class he would, discreetly, sip from a bottle. He eventually got so drunk that he lost his balance while sitting and broke his arm from the fall. For an 8th grade mind this was rather funny. But nowadays thinking about the alcohol abuse and stories that were behind it is just sad. Him dying 3 years later after drunkenly falling down a set of stairs makes it even more disturbing. High school Spanish teacher vomited in the middle of a lesson on my friend Sean who was sitting in the front row. It looked like a bunch of ramen noodles. It looked like she didn't chew because they were intact. There was no warning too, it went from the conjugation of the verb blarrgghh. She apologized and ran out of the room. We were left alone for the rest of the period, half the students laughing and half mortified. Poor Sean. Had a science teacher who would send unruly kids out of the class, then go out and shout profanities at them and threaten to piss all over them right there in the hall. I had just graduated from high school and went back to school to get some papers. I ran across my math teacher, we chatted for a little while and he invited me to play tennis later that week. I said yes, it sounded like fun, with a teacher you feared until a few months back. My mum drove me to the club but he never showed up. I went back home and called him to know what happened. It was before cell phones so I had to call his house. His wife answered and said she knew nothing about it. Later that night, he called back and it turned out he was mad at me because I let his wife know he had planned to see me. Lost a large chunk of innocence that day. There was a very Catholic Navy ROTC teacher who got all up in a 14-year-old girl's face, screaming at her for being an atheist and that she's going to go to hell. In front of other students. He didn't teach there the next year. Not a class 1 had but a teacher in my high school got fired because he was looking at rape porn during class. He forgot the projector was on. Had an English substitute teacher, first year of college, it was attached to a high school, who farted crazy loud all of the time. None of us wanted to say anything thinking maybe she had some disease. One day some younger kid walks his get a full blast and immediately cups his hands to his face and go, "Ugh." She chews him out saying how passing gas is natural, she doesn't believe people should hold it in, etc. Basically by the end of her rant all the sympathy from 2 weeks of thinking, this poor woman, was whipped away and she basically admitted she has nothing wrong with her, she is just disgusting. Had a kindergarten teacher at the Lutheran school I was at who was psychotic. She paddled kids and threatened to hold me back a year. I started a year earlier than the other kids so, I was like 4, if I didn't learn to tie my own shoes, yeah, and Dapper Dan was no help. Anyway. We had to assemble these stupid construction paper flags where the pole was a wrapping paper roll, and the stripes were made out of construction paper linked together. We had to cut out white stars for the field. I had problems making mine, and a girl showed me the pentagram way to trace it on one side and flip it over. Still had trouble. I looked at the kid next to me. He was a dark-skinned exchange student from Israel. His stars had 6 points. Know where this is going? Then stop reading now. Before I can say, hey, I thought they were supposed to be 5-pointed. The teacher comes up and throws a raging fit, that is not how you make a star. You never ever make a star like that. She dug into him excessively. He looked at me with this panicked look and started to cry. His crying caused me to cry. She spun on me and got crazy on me. What are you crying for? Stop it now. She took us both out and punished us. I heard the kid had some kind of disease like lupus and his kidneys failed, and he died a year and a half later, By then, he was already gone due to the health issues. I remember the one teacher in the next grade telling us about it. I looked back and thought how sad he had a short life with such a hideously confusing and traumatic thing thrown at him. When I heard the teacher was dying of cancer much later, I was tempted to visit her in the hospital, stand over her, call her a BTCH, and spit on her. Yet, I'm glad that didn't happen.